Welcome to the Politics People. My guest today is the headmistress of the Michaela Community School in Wembley Park, London, England. I'm talking to Katharine Birbalsingh. Thank you so much for making time to come on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So look, I introduced you as a headmistress, so here it would be a school principal, but that's such an understatement. It's only sort of the tip of the iceberg of what you do, because you're quite a revolutionary figure in education, certainly in the UK. Can you give the listeners an idea of what your approach to heading up your school is and why you became such a public figure as a result of it?
Yeah. Well, I was a normal teacher, head of department, then deputy head, so vice principal in a school. And I used to write a blog called To Miss with Love. So based on the book and film To Sir with Love, that's where I got the idea from, where Sidney Poitier plays a teacher in that film. And I used to write about the terrible things that I thought were going wrong with education, which I used to do it anonymously because you're not really meant to say these sorts of things out loud. And I wrote this thing for a few years. Penguin then contacted me wanting to make it into a book. I agreed to do one anonymously. My publisher then knew some people in government, Michael Gove, Steve Hilton, Steve Hilton is now in California. I'd say he's gone over to your side. He was one of David Cameron's advisors, David Cameron being the prime minister at the time. I went to Number 10 and gave them some advice, what I thought was good advice on what to do with education. They invited me to go and speak at one of their political conferences. I was a bit naive and didn't really think much of it, and went along, gave a speech, got myself into all sorts of trouble. And you can always Google my speech, or you go on YouTube and put my name in, and Conservative Party Conference 2010, and I'll come up. And you'll actually see that it's just my first name. It says Katharine, and it calls me a head teacher, even though I was a deputy head teacher, because I refused to give them my full name. And I refused to give them my title because I was a bit naive. I just sort of thought, well, if I go and I don't tell anybody what my name is, then I can just give my speech and I can go away. And that seems slightly ridiculous now, and it was even more ridiculous then. But in those days, you've got to remember we weren't as online as we are now. So there was no Twitter, there was no Instagram and Snapchat and all of that. And it hadn't really occurred to me that obviously once something has been recorded, that it can be replayed. And I had been told that the speech would air on BBC Parliament, one of our channels here, but nobody watches BBC Parliament. And I thought it would be fine. But in the end, my speech was watched more that year than the speech of the Prime Minister, David Cameron. And I said some things about education system being broken and all sorts. And it made some people very angry, namely the unions, the teaching unions, for instance, and various other people. And I was sort of kicked out of teaching. And when I say kicked out of teaching, I was told I would never work in the state sector, so in public schools ever again. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do? This is what I love. I love disadvantaged kids. I'd always worked in the inner city. It's what I get up in the morning. I love it, And so I had to think of an alternative. And in 2010, free schools were just starting in England. They are the equivalent to charter schools in America. Now, charter schools have been going for the last 30 years. In America. They've only been around in England since 2010. And so there was that option of me setting up my own school. So I thought, right, I'm going to do that. It took us over 3 years in the end. And the reason is because we had a lot of detractors, a lot of people trying to stop us, just like it was for the charter school movement in America at the beginning. Although you will find, if you read Thomas Sowell's Charter Schools and Their Enemies, where he writes about the Success Academy in New York and how amazing they are, you will read about some of the troubles they have had, even in more recent times, because the public school system hates charter schools, just like the state school system here hates free schools. So I was sort of doubly hated. I was hated for speaking at the Conservative Party conference, and then I was hated for being this kind of poster girl, they used to call me, for free schools. So in the end, we opened up in 2014, and Michaela, our school, has been going for the last 7 years. But then I've made myself even more controversial by the kind of free school we've set up. So we are very pro traditional methods. We believe in a very strong discipline. We believe in old-fashioned teaching, where the teacher leads the learning from the front of the class and the desks are in rows. And a lot of more progressives in education, of which there are quite a number, have, you know, taken a stand against the kinds of values which I would say are small c conservative, that we try and instill in our children. There we go. That was a very long answer.
No, it's. I didn't want to interrupt. It was perfect and thorough. Yeah, and again for people listening, actually, some people in Britain as well. I mean, the school's in Wembley Park, which is. I'm not damning it, but it's not known to be a wealthy area, Wembley Park. Are a lot of your pupils from perhaps what would be considered lower income
Yes.
families?
So it's a very challenging area. You know, there are sadly just the other week, one of the kids in nearby here, he was stabbed to death nearby. A couple of years before that, there was another one who was stabbed to death. One of our kids came out of school a couple of years ago, came out, got stabbed with I mean, he's fine now, but he got stabbed a few times with a compass by some boys waiting. In the days when there were no masks, kids would show up on bikes, wearing masks, waiting for some of our boys leaving. You know, this is the inner city, and it has all the typical problems of the inner city, of alcoholism, drugs, knife carrying, etc., gangs, you know, bad stuff. So, yeah, this is the inner city. Having said that, I think we create a little oasis here in our school. We don't have any trees. We don't have any grass. We don't have a sports hall. The old car park here is used as a yard for the kids, which means the staff cannot drive their cars to work. They have to take public transport. We're right next to the trains, and so it's very loud with the trains passing for us to be heard when we're trying to talk to the kids in the yard. But, you know, you make do with what you got. And I think in many ways people dislike us for that, actually, because we tend to prove that success is less about money than we would like. I mean, look, I'm always going to say, please give me more money to the government. More than happy to take more money in order to pay staff and hire more teachers and so on. But I do think that the main reasons why schools are not as effective as they could be is not because of money, but because of bad ideas in the system.
Well, and that's it. So how, talking of bad ideas then, in the actual classroom, what is the difference between what you're doing and what other schools in the state sector might be doing?
Okay, well, and this is hard. Everybody has to put their thinking caps on if I want to get into this into detail, because it can be hard to understand, because the kind of thing that we stand against is the sort of thing that's quite seductive to most people. So it's not just schools that are taken in by this, it's ordinary people who are. I remember recently, for instance, on Twitter, lots of my followers who are lovely people, they send me stuff on Twitter because they think I really love it. And they sent me this video of a man, a physics teacher, who did this kind of performance. He was teaching the kids about forces. And he had this, he was trying to show that if you have a ball on a string and you just let it go, it's not going to go as far as if you were to give it some force and some energy behind it. And you push it forward. And he had this glass box on the other side, and he pushed the ball, and the ball bashed into the glass, and it broke, and it made a big sound. You know, it was a great performance. Then he went and put himself, his head, where the glass was, and he let go of the ball, and he said, look, it's going to go off, it's going to swing forward, then it's going to swing back, and let's see whether or not it bashes me in the face. And lo and behold, as he knew, he let go of the ball without putting any force behind it, and it came back, and it came right up to his face, but it didn't actually hit him, and it went down again. And all of these people on Twitter said, this is the most brilliant physics teacher ever, Miss Snuffy, because I'm called Miss Snuffy on Twitter. You're going to love this. And the thing is, I watched it and thought, okay, well, what have they learned at the end of it? He was talking about forces, and he was talking so quickly. I don't know, he mentioned kinetic forces. I have no idea. I am no more cognizant of forces than I was at the beginning of that, than I am at the end. And that's always the question to ask. When you see a teaching moment, what are you actually learning? Now, what happens in that? The reason why his video had been liked tens of thousands of times and all of my followers presumed that I would love this video is because it's entertaining. And they think to themselves, the kids are going to love this and they're going to remember it. And that's often what people do in schools. That's what teachers do. But at the end of that lesson, because he was speaking so quickly, because he hadn't really taught them anything, all you got from that lesson is, wasn't that fun? Sir nearly got bashed in the head with a ball. And you'll remember it, but you haven't actually learned anything. The way in which you learn about forces is that you stand at the front of the lesson and you teach it to them. And then you repeat it 2 days later. And you drill them with some knowledge that they need to remember. And then you quiz them on it 4 days later. And then you repeat it again another 6 days later. And you understand how to space your repetition. You understand how to deliver the knowledge in the first place. You then understand how to get the kids to contribute with that knowledge and to analyze it and mix it around and maybe do a little bit of pair work quickly so that they can practice their answers. Then you have some class discussion where you can discuss this. Now, all of this stuff that I'm just mentioning takes a lot of training and a lot of time and effort. People often think that anyone can be a teacher, and it's just not true. You can't just stand up in front of a class and be an amazing teacher. You need to be trained, and then you need to practice it over time. And all that stuff I just mentioned and more goes into what makes a really great teacher. But too often people think anyone can teach, and actually it's about making it fun and engaging. And what they don't understand is that what makes a subject engaging is when a child really understands it. And then he's prompted to ask more questions and to move to the next level up and the next level up. And as you keep moving, you have to keep scaffolding the learning as you go and moving the scaffolding away once they've got it, so you can get to the next step and you scaffold that and then you move it away and so on. That's not what that physics guy was doing. He wasn't doing that at all. He was just entertaining the kids. And you know what? More power to him. You want to entertain? That's great. You're not actually teaching. And people just misunderstand the difference between teaching and entertainment.
And again, I don't know. I've seen the clip you're talking about, but it's unlikely, isn't it, that physics teacher learned the physics that he's trying to impart in an entertaining way, exactly. That he'd learned it in a kind of everybody discover your desks kind of way. Exactly. He hasn't learned it like that. And I don't want to knock him because look. Oh, let's knock him. Let's knock him. You know, well, there's nothing wrong with entertaining your kids. Oh, it's ridiculous. That's what TV's for. Well, if they know all that stuff already and he's just having a bit of a laugh and it's the end of term or whatever it is, great. But I doubt that's the case. He thinks he's actually teaching them something. And I can guarantee you that all of my Twitter followers certainly thought that he was teaching them something. And the problem is that we're all fooled by the entertainment. And as you said, he himself never learned physics in that way. He had some boring physics teacher standing at the front of the class saying, now everybody turn to page 25 and da-da-da-da. Now, look, I'm not saying you need to be boring. You can actually be a traditionalist and stand in front of the class and make it super interesting, but you're not entertaining. And it's that nuance. It's the difference between being boring. They think you're either boring or you're super entertaining. No, you're somewhere in the middle where you're making it really, the subject matter really interesting. So kids get inspired by physics, by history, and then they want to know more. And the only way you're going to want to know more is if you know something in the first place, and then you can build on that. And, you know, it should be really obvious. I sort of feel like it is obvious, but then I see things like that and I realize it isn't obvious at all. And people are just so easily seduced, you know. Sorry to interrupt. The TED Talks. Sorry to interrupt. I was going to say on the TED Talks on education, every single one of them is all about entertainment. It's all wrong. TED would never have me on talking because I'm talking about stuff that seems boring. They want people who say, teaching is like magic. And we whiz around and do all these amazing whizzy things. And suddenly children are inspired because you're doing a French song and rapping it, you know? Like that's what they think. When actually you got to learn your verbs in order to learn French, you know? Like it's just,
I sometimes despair, but other days I get up and I think, no, we can change the world and we can change people on this and we can get them to see what real teaching is all about.
Well, is it? It's my estimation again. It's one of my sort of little pub rants that this is a change, or this is a culture that happens in state schools. It's private schools haven't gone down this everybody please yourself to the same extent, or am I just totally wrong on that?
I think you would have been right on that 15 years ago. I actually think the private sector are catching up very quickly with the state sector. In fact, I hear people in private schools, other head teachers and principals and so on, I hear them saying the kinds of things that they said in the state sector 20 years ago. So things like a mind is not a pail to be filled, but a spark to be ignited. That's the kind of thing they say. And notice how that sounds really seductive. And your audience might listen to this and say, well, of course it's a spark to be ignited. Why would you just want to pour your own ideas into the kid's head? Because you know what? If you don't put the alphabet into their head, they're never going to learn how to read. Now, this should be obvious, but it isn't. So we think what we need to do is get them up out of their desks, wandering around the classroom, putting Post-it notes on each other's foreheads and all sorts of nonsense. When actually the teacher just needs to stand at the front of the class and teach them something. So that is happening more and more in private schools. And the reason why they can get away with it in private schools is because parents will make up for it in private schools. So if their kids aren't doing so well academically, they'll hire tutors. They'll also be able to help them, perhaps. Mom might be able to stay at home, welcomes them at the end of the day, sits down and helps them with their homework. If they don't understand it, she spends a little bit of extra time. She goes on YouTube. She finds that maths video she likes and she plays it for them and they talk about maths together. Whereas if you're coming from a challenging family, if you're coming from a family where English isn't the first language, where there's tons of brothers and sisters, where there are no books in the house, where you don't sit round to a family dinner every evening and talk about the politics of the day, through which you might learn a bit of geography and a little bit of science and a little bit of history, that you don't holiday in the Maldives and you don't go trekking across, I don't know, South Africa with your older brother to go and discover, what communism is like in Venezuela. You don't do any of this. The only way you know what communism is by being taught about it in your lessons. And if in your lessons, instead of being taught, you're gluing Post-it notes around and doing carousel learning, which means you're getting up and moving from station to station instead of sitting in your desk and listening to the teacher. And if all of that carousel learning means that your naughty friends are getting into a fight next to you and somebody's pulling your hair over here and there's so much distraction, you in the end don't learn very much. And those kids are the poorer children in our society are kept back massively. And then what's said is the reason these kids can't learn is that they're poor or they're black or they live on a council estate or they have a single mother or whatever it is. There are millions of excuses to explain why these kids can't learn, when in actual fact, they would be able to learn if they were just taught properly.
I always think it must be a lot of pressure on children interfacing with the kind of can't tell the difference between respect and popularity kind of education establishment, because it assumes that the children keep getting told that they have all the answers, that they, and this is again just my cod sense, that it's within them, they know more than we do. I learn so much more from my pupils than they learn from me, all this kind of garbage. And my memory of being a kid is I just wanted to be in receipt of information. And if I'd been told then that it was all within me, I'd have been like really self-conscious about the fact that I don't think it is. And I think it must come, if you're not from a kind of active middle-class family that has resources and tutors and books in the house, etc., to be told that you are the font and it's all within you, it must feel, I would have thought, it must put a lot of children under a lot of pressure to feel that they're coming up short, that somehow it's not in me. You're looking in the wrong place. That's just my cod sense. It's like, try and make sense of that, if you will.
Well, I'll tell you what happens in the inner city. We're not even getting to that point. There's just chaos all the time. There's fights going on in your classroom. There are fights in the corridors. as a kid, or even as some staff in some schools, they're scared to walk down the corridors because of the harm that might happen. Kids will train themselves not to go to the toilet all day because of the bullying that takes place in the toilets. Um, and they know what's going to happen to them. They're scared to go out at lunchtime. Now, I mean, you get to the point where parents are saying, I don't want to send my child to that school because he might get stabbed. I mean, let alone forget about learning, right? So one of the big things that we get right, I think, here at Michaela is that we are super strict. And people might say, oh, we're too strict. We have silent corridors, for instance. So that means that they walk in silence, in single file to their lessons. And people say, why do you have to go to such extents? Why, you obviously just hate children. And they imagine me, I imagine they think that I'm wandering up and down the corridors with my whip, taking delight in throwing children into detention. When in fact, I'm rarely in the corridors. It's my teachers who are there trying to make sure that the kids get quickly and quietly to their lessons. And we can do our transitions in about a minute and a half, which is quite amazing. In some schools, it will take 10 to 15 minutes to do that transition. And when you finally got all of the kids quiet and they're finally in their desks and you've got their pens in their hands, some kid swings the door open and it goes bam, and it opens up. I have arrived, And then what happens? The teachers then, all the kids start laughing and screaming and the teachers lost control again. And then they're trying to calm them down. And so out of every lesson, that might be an hour, you might get 45 minutes, 40 minutes of teaching going on if you're lucky. And during that teaching, you will get lots of disruptions, lots of kids misbehaving. Whereas in this school, you have got 59 minutes out of every hour that you're being taught. You've got that. And you are all working really hard. And when I get kids that come here mid-year from other schools, they come and they say, God, I've never had to work so hard in all my life. I've never had to concentrate for such long periods of time. And at first they can find it really hard. And then after 6 to 8 weeks, they get used to it and they raise their standards for themselves and they work really hard. And that's what we want. Because at the end of the day, the thing is that people complain about, and I'm not saying they shouldn't complain, but about racism or sexism or problems with equality for poor people and all sorts, fine. Well, what are you going to do about it? All you can do is make sure you give the poor and any oppressed group the opportunity to be able to make something of their lives. And the number one thing that's going to give them that opportunity is education. It's the number one thing. And why education is not a vote winner, I will never understand. People don't make the connection. You get people, BLM and so on, marching in the streets, demanding justice and so on. Well, I'll tell you how you get justice. Come work in a school. Come teach these kids. Let's raise our standards. Certainly stop fighting people like me who are trying to make something right for these kids, because that is the only way these kids are going to make something of their lives. It is with an education, by learning how to read and write and be numerate in the first instance, and then getting a real sense of geography and history, learning a foreign language and some science, getting great exams and going off to a university and making something of their lives. And that is something that we are doing for our kids here. And so I feel, like I'm the leader of a revolution.
Well, I agree. I think that's exactly what you are. But look, you must have trained in the teaching profession in the way that everybody gets a prize day. Teachers, how did it differ for you? How did you come to this realization? What was your epiphany, if you like? Because as I said, you didn't train this way, did you? You must have trained in the system that you're rebelling against.
Yeah. So I was a typical kind of lefty teacher, almost have prizes, as you say. So it means everybody gets a certificate as opposed to saying, oh, somebody's come first, somebody's come second. The progressive teaching methods of not standing at the front of the classroom, of children being in groups, and their desks are facing each other instead of facing the teacher. And then the children are leading their learning, which is called child-centered learning, as opposed to the teacher leading the learning up at the front with the desks in rows. And so, that's how I was taught how to teach. I would then try some of these methods and then think this isn't working so well. So then I would try other methods. And it was just through trial and error that I would realize what worked in the classroom and what didn't work in the classroom. And what I always found time and time again is that it was the more traditional methods that worked in the classroom, and the progressive ones were actually well, the kids didn't remember anything. The kids didn't learn very much. You had poor behavior. You know, they were disrespectful. It just didn't work. And so this is over many years that I then changed my mind. And that is how I started writing that blog. And it was while I was writing that blog, because I call myself a small c conservative now. And I would say that my values are very much small c conservative. And when I was writing this blog, people would come on. There was no Twitter in those days. So you had to have conversations on the actual blog post in the comments section. And that was what happened. And people would come on, the liberal kind of lefties would come on and say, and get really angry with the things I was saying. And I'd always say, no, I'm just like you. You know, I'm a good person. I'm on the left just like you, trying to save the world here in the inner city. And they would continue to get angry. And conservatives would come on my blog and they would agree with me. And the lefties kept saying, well, you're obviously a conservative. And I'd say, no, I'm not a conservative. I can't be. I'm a good person. And it took me years, literally years, for me to come to terms with the fact that actually conservatives aren't bad people. I thought they were. I thought by definition, if you're a conservative, you're a bad person, and that you want to play golf, and that you want to earn lots of money, and that you don't care about poor people. And so I obviously, well, I don't play golf. I don't want to earn lots of money. And I'm all about helping poor people because that's where I work. I've spent my whole life working with poor people and trying to make their lives better. So by definition, I could not be a conservative. What I didn't understand was that, in fact, conservatism is more believing in personal responsibility, believing in a meritocracy, believing in a duty towards your community and giving back. It means believing in tradition and not just changing things for the sake of change. And thinking carefully before changing things and thinking, well, if this has always worked, then why has it worked? And if it hasn't worked, well, then obviously you want to change that. So I came to realize gradually, and that's when I then ended up at the Conservative Party conference. And in my speech, I actually say, in the election in May, I voted Conservative. And that was me sort of coming out to all my friends and various people. And I lost friends. I mean, that speech, friends for years, 20-year-long friends I lost. I mean, I lost friends because it's simply unacceptable to some people on the left to be conservative. And in fact, I saw an old friend today who works at one of the local schools, and he came to our school today. And he was saying, well, Catherine, the thing is that I don't agree with 60% of what you say. I just don't agree with it. But when people say conservative to me and they criticize you, I always say, well, it's good to have somebody with a different opinion. And I said, yeah, that's good. Exactly. Diversity of opinion, and he's one of the few, I've known him for over 20 years. He's one of the few friends who hung on, even though he totally disagrees with what I say.
I know I'm really interested in the friends that you lost and what you were teaching in the system and you figured out a few things along the way. It's not a small thing to then the blog, anonymous blog, I totally get because obviously it's anonymous. But apart from not giving your surname, the steps that you must have taken from that to having to share this message at the Conservative Party conference and knowing that did you expect to lose these friends? I mean, were you surprised by the fallout from it, or was it something that you were, this could be a logical consequence of what I'm about to do? I know you're saying I didn't think anybody'd be watching, but within the teaching profession, you must have been muttering for a while to your colleagues and friends as you. It seems such a huge. I mean, as you say, 2010. It was pre-Brexit. It was pre-Trump. It was a real anathema to the anybody involved in the teaching profession to be anywhere near the Conservative Party conference, to let alone speak.
Yeah, well, that was the problem. I mean, the thing is that, sure, I said things that didn't necessarily sit well with people when I was at school, but I never said, I'm voting Conservative. I mean, I might make comments on things, and they might just disagree with me, and that would be that. And I was good at my job, and I obviously loved the kids, and so on, so people respected me, and that was fine. But to actually go to a Conservative Party conference and speak and to criticize the education system. I mean, I didn't really criticize the education system publicly with my friends. I wrote a blog anonymously. They didn't know I was writing this blog. So I did now and again say some things, but it was quite rare. And I was never going way out in the way that I would write things on my blog. I would say how outrageous it was that little Johnny had his money stolen and how there was such poor behavior systems in various schools. And I never talked about that kind of thing out loud with my colleagues. And I certainly didn't say to them in May time that I had voted Conservative. Like I say, it was at that party conference that I then came out. Now, did I know? I knew what I was saying was naughty. I knew I shouldn't say it. But I also thought, I'll just go and say it, and then that'll be the end of it. And I'm being a bit naughty, and I'm a bit scared to say it, but I just didn't think, oh, this will be replayed. And you know what? Had I not spoken well, I mean, I did. I spoke well enough in order for the crowd to stand. They gave me a standing ovation, you see. Mm-hmm. So if I'd been boring in the way that I'd spoken, I think it probably would have disappeared and nobody would have known anything about me. But I spoke really well. And then people stood up and they really liked me. And it was at that moment that the press turned. And, the cameras were then on me. And, I wasn't the only one who spoke. There were 3 other teachers who spoke that day. You've never heard of any of them, right? And then I was trying to avoid the cameras. And then the worst thing happened, which was my school sent me home, you see, because of all of the nonsense. And then it made it even worse because then, all the right-wing papers went crazy. Teacher tells the truth and she's suspended, it went mad. And in the end, my position at the school just became untenable. And then when I started trying to find some other job, I was told I'd never work in the state sector again. And then I had to set up my own school, and free schools were such a political hot potato. I suddenly became this free school poster girl, and everyone knew me as that. So I was no longer the woman who spoke at the party conference. I was the woman who believed in free schools. Nowadays, I'm not that anymore. Now I'm the woman who believes in traditional education and has set up the school called Michaela. And Michaela, the school, has an international reputation. We get over 600 visitors every year, not during COVID times, but, normally we get 600 visitors a year. They come from all over the world. We've had teachers come from New York, from Chicago, I even had one guy in California, actually, who he was a truck driver, and his wife was a teacher, and she absolutely loved what we did. And he contacted us and said, I want to buy her a ticket to go to England as a surprise for her birthday. I'm going to pay for a hotel, and then that way she can come and visit your school. Like, that's the kind of thing that happens. I've had people come from Australia, New Zealand, Germany, all over the place. And they come here, we had these people came from Amsterdam. And when they arrived, they came in, and then they said, we stood outside. And we looked at each other and we said, we're here, we're at Michaela.
Wow. So you're single-handedly responsible for the tourist boom in Wembley Park.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I tell you, for people who are in education, it is really exciting because when you come here and you see our kids and you see how much they're learning and how polite they are and how friendly and how resilient and how determined and hardworking they are, you're really inspired. And then you think, gosh, look at what education can achieve. I think often people in the education establishment can feel a bit demoralized because they put so much time and effort into their jobs. And then they don't necessarily see much return because the poor kids are still failing and the rich kids are doing well. And then they say, well, what's the point of me then? Because a lot of us go into this because we believe in social mobility and we believe in equal opportunity. And what Michaela does is it does both. You see that social mobility happening right in front of your eyes, and it makes you feel really good as a teacher.
Have you won anybody round? Has anybody who perhaps ostracized you after the party conference, has anybody come round? Have people come to you saying, we were wrong, yes. You were right, please forgive us?
They don't say, please forgive us. They're not that obvious about it, but there are lots and lots of people who I meet at places, and they say, I never used to like you. But I've been following you on Twitter for 3 years, and I came to see the school, and I had to come back a second time a year later. And having listened to you now for 3 years, I've realized that you're right. Like, and they say it, and they say, so keep going, and then off they go. I hear it all the time from people. Also, old friends of mine. I mean, people who I've now lost touch with, but there were a few old colleagues actually at one of my old schools who I'd lost touch with, and I don't know, maybe about a year ago we met for lunch, and I hadn't seen them in a decade, and we met, and I suppose there was just a sense of, okay, well, time has passed, and now we can talk again. I mean, it's more that they've forgiven me. They've forgiven me for the betrayal of going over to the other side. There's a combination. My own friends who have then forgiven me, or other people who have changed their minds because of what they've seen at the school, and not just me, not just us, what we do here. I talk to people all the time. I feel there's a real movement in England, a real revolution going on, where a lot of people are changing their minds about what is possible in education, and that we're reversing the trend of the last 50 or 60 years, which has been to move towards a progressive way of teaching.
Yeah, I think it's in the West generally. For me, I mean, I'm only comparing it to the United States. There's definitely a groundswell, and as you say, I think our charter schools in the States, they have a longer history than the academies in Britain. But they're all kind of catching up, and it's because you've basically replaced in Britain. They used to be called the grammar school system, didn't they? That would be the place where people that couldn't afford to pay fees for a school could send their brighter, poorer children. But
the thing is that our school doesn't necessarily have the brightest children. We have a whole range of different children.
Do you just do you take your local catchment? There's no...
Yeah, exactly. So we're just like any other school. And what I would say is that while I believe very much in the freedoms that the charter school movement and the free school movement give us, it isn't necessarily the case that charter schools or free schools follow a traditional education kind of curriculum. So you can do anything in a free school or a charter school. You can be super progressive. In fact, some of the most progressive schools are charter schools or free schools. It doesn't go hand in hand that free schools are traditionalists. In fact, I'd say it's quite rare to find an entire school that has traditional teaching. What you tend to find is pockets of teachers in different schools who are traditional in their approach. What makes Michaela very different is that traditional teaching happens throughout the entire school.
That's really interesting. Have you had any, I hate to say failures, but have you had any heartbreaking expulsions within this time? Are there people that you just can't reach? Are there pupils that just haven't responded?
Yeah, of course. Of course. But I would say our number of expulsions is fewer than others in the local area. But yes, of course, there are kids. I don't know. I mean, they often tend to be kids who have been excluded permanently from other schools and then have come to us. I don't know. I think of a boy right now in my head who held up the local petrol station with a weapon, for instance. I mean, that sort of thing. And yeah, you need to exclude. You can't say that that's okay. That behavior is not okay. you need to exclude them. And other local schools will do the same thing. We will then take in kids that have been excluded from other schools. I mean, that tends to be what happens with these excluded kids. They just get passed around from school to school, and we are on that list just like any other school, and we take in kids. And what's amazing is sometimes those kids actually turn themselves around here, which is great.
Has this experience had a knock-on effect for you with your views on other political matters? It's like, because if I was wrong on this and I'm small c conservative, gosh, I'll look at other issues as well. Has it had a knock-on effect to your personal politics?
Yeah, the thing is that I spend all my time working and on education. So it's hard to say on, like, say, health, for instance, and our NHS. I don't really know. I know that the right, for instance, can be highly critical of the NHS, whereas the left will have no one say a bad word about it. And it sort of reminds me of how it is with education, that I wasn't allowed to criticize the education system. And I know that the education system has massive problems. And so then I think, well, what if I knew, what if I worked in a hospital? I'd probably have inside knowledge there too. And I might not be so quick to decide that the NHS is untouchable in the same way as people think that about the education system. So, but I don't really know. So I just sort of, I'm just reserve judgment because I can't say. So I'm certainly not in awe of the NHS. I just sort of think, well, I'm not really sure. And maybe one day when I retire, I'll have enough time to read up loads on the NHS and talk to people who actually work in hospitals, etc., and find out more. I do have small c conservative values when it comes to opinions about the welfare state, when it comes to the state in general. And that's because I come up against that all the time in my job. So I do know the welfare state. I see the effect that it has on people who are of lesser means because I've been working with them for over 20 years. And there I see, for instance, the inability of the left to recognize that money doesn't just solve all problems. I wish it did. I wish that you could make it so that you just give the state lots of money and that the state then just redistributes it and gives it to poorer people. I mean, why not? It seems like a really nice idea. And often the way the left think is they think, well, and the people on the right who want to stop this, it's because they want to keep that money for themselves. And they want to get super rich and they want to keep the poor poor, and they don't like redistributing their money through taxes. And that might very well be true for some rich people. Bezos and his mates, I don't know, I can imagine that might very well be true. I have no idea. It certainly isn't true for me. For one, I don't have loads of money, but two, it is because I know through firsthand experience what happens when you just hand people money. It makes them dependent. It makes them unable to take responsibility for their own lives and to have self-determination and agency to change it. And we all know that what makes somebody happy in life is a sense of purpose. And a sense of agency where they are able to own their lives and do something with it. And in the same way that the rich kid with the trust fund ends up taking too many drugs and overdoses, it's because they don't have purpose in their lives, because they've had everything given to them. And it's the same thing with somebody who's on welfare. Now, somebody who might be critical of me might say, that's ridiculous because somebody on welfare doesn't have that much money. Yes, I understand that. But the fact is, that if you make it so that you are removing their agency, they're going to lose purpose in their lives. And I've seen this happen over and over and over again. Poor people in this country are far more dependent in terms of their mentality than you will find in countries like, say, Nigeria or Jamaica or India, in places where the welfare state is not so generous. Now, I'm not saying that we then want to have starving children on the streets. That is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we don't need any welfare. I'm saying that when the state is too generous, this can undermine the intentions of the giver. And that while we're trying to help these people, simply putting money into the palms of their hands is not going to help. You might want to give it for a restricted amount of time. You might want to give a restricted amount of money. You certainly don't want it to be the case that you are better off on welfare than when getting a job, because then why would you bother getting a job? I mean, and I've seen this over and over and over and over again. Like thousands of times. And so I used to think, like a typical lefty, that the best thing to do was to just get those evil rich people to pay more taxes and then just give it to the poor. I don't think that anymore. And I don't think that, not because I have, more time for rich people. It's because of what I've learned. I've seen what it does to the poor. I work with them all the time. And it's not helpful. And so I'm reminded of a book by Jason Riley in America, who's an African American, called Please Stop Helping Us. I mean, he's talking specifically about race, and he's talking to white people and saying, look, white people, stop helping black people because you're actually hurting us, is what he's saying. Mm-hmm. It's a similar kind of thing. And I've just seen that all my life, and it's just been a bit well, it's helped me change my mind, and I keep saying it out loud and trying to explain it in a way so that people who do lean left might reconsider some of their views and understand why I call myself a small C conservative.
I always get in trouble with my very limited audience, but it's just even with animal husbandry at places like London Zoo, like 20, 30 years ago, they found that if they made it challenging for the lions, say, to eat, so instead of just throwing meat into them, they made it more difficult for them to get the meat. They would
Yeah,
they'd bind up their dinner in some kind of ball that they had to break apart to get to, just
yeah,
something so that they had to be
yeah,
resourceful, if you like.
yeah,
They're even doing that with animals, and what we treat our poor like they're battery hens. It's
yeah.
just awful to me. It's like it's just this inversion of, I don't know, the middle class values, if you like. The middle classes who end up often running these welfare schemes, etc. They don't realise that they've been imbued with the alphabet, if you like, to make that comparison. They've got resourcefulness, they've got accountability built in, so that they can win the
That's right.
lottery and not blow it all, for instance.
That's right.
But
That's right. What I always say is welfare is like heroin, and your friends have not been affected by this heroin, so you don't see it. Because sometimes people in poor communities, they're not even on the welfare themselves, but the welfareism that has infected their whole communities makes everybody have this kind of malaise where they're not up and go and let's do it and da 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 da. And it's I don't see that. One of the big things that changed my mind actually was my travels. So I went traveling, went to visit schools in Turkey and India and China and Jamaica, and worked in a school in South Africa for one summer, which was over, for 6 weeks. I learned so much, and I would see kids who had absolutely nothing walking 5 miles to get to school, and their parents who had no money would save up everything in order to pay for the uniform. And they were far poorer than the kids that we have here. And then they would sit in a classroom with 200 other kids on broken tables and chairs with textbooks from the 1970s. And they would sit in silence, listening. And I'd think, well, this is a bit weird. How come they can behave and they're really, really poor? And yet the kids in inner city London who aren't that poor, we're saying they can't behave because they're poor. Yeah. Obviously, poverty has nothing to do with behavior. But it's amazing how in the West, we assume that. We just think, oh, if you're rich, it's easy to behave. If you're poor, it's really hard. There really is no connection. And actually, the connection is all about victimhood. The more you see yourself as a victim, the more likely you are to misbehave. And I always go back to that old adage of, you teach a man to fish, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. And that is what we're trying to achieve here at Michaela. We're teaching kids lots of skills and knowledge so that they can go out in the world and make something of themselves. And then when they have children, their children are going to have that step up, and then they move a step up. And that is what social mobility is. That's how you do it. You don't do it by, I don't know, marching on a BLM protest. And I'm not criticizing them. People can do that. I just think there's far more to be had from getting your hands into something like being a teacher in the inner city, doing something for these kids and enabling them to change their stars.
Oh, I couldn't agree. But I mean, it's the white savior complex, isn't it? You've got victimhood on one side that's been encouraged, and then there is this there's this white left liberal leaning kind of philosophy that they just, as I said, they are the white saviors. They're going to go and save these infantilized, poor people. And I just think it's tragic. And everybody's really well intentioned, but they just don't realize at the last minute, if you'd have just encouraged resourcefulness from that impoverished person or from that child, they'd have stepped up to the plate. They'd have actually improved themselves, But instead, you give them another sop, or you give them the heroin, the equivalent. But that's right. That's my
Although
2 cents.
I say they are well intentioned. You're right, but I would also say that we mustn't shy away from saying that they also like feeling good about themselves. Yeah. I think a lot of these problems they stem from people being more interested in how they feel than in actually how much good they are doing. And they put a black box up on Instagram because it makes them feel good about themselves. Their friends like them. and that's enough for them. And I sort of feel, well, like, no, that's not good enough. But black box on Instagram isn't going to help anybody. Why don't you go volunteer your time at a soup kitchen on a Sunday afternoon? Why don't you go and work for some charity on a Saturday, and help them? Putting a black box on Instagram, that's all about you. It's not about the people you're saying you want to help. And so I always judge people with that. How much good are you actually doing? Or are you more interested in helping yourself?
Well, yeah, it's nice to feel like the savior, isn't it? It's that inverted racism. It's like they just white liberals know that they are so powerful and so magnanimous, if you like, that they're almost like, God touching Adam's finger. It's just like they're passing on this power because they're going to use it wisely. But we know inherently we are better and we are the saviors, but we're going to spend it wisely. It's just tragic. And like I said, I wouldn't mind that. I've got no problem if you want to be a white liberal, that's fine. I just see the poor suffering generationally because of that wrong-headed approach to helping the community. They're not helping anybody pull themselves up, which is where you come in. That's what you're actually doing, is some boots on the ground training for people. What's next for you? I'm going to let you have your life back. What's next for you?
Well, we're opening up another school in Stevenage, which is just outside of London. That will open in 2024. It was meant to be 23, but now because of COVID, it's opening in 24. And then we'll open a third school and a fourth school. I'd like to do a primary at some point. That's it. Relatively modest. I always say, you can't change the world. But what you can do is change your little spot in the world. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to demonstrate what can be done in education. Lots of people are learning from us. Lots has changed in education, I think, thanks to us. I think we give a lot of people hope, as well as changing the lives of the kids here. And we'll change the lives of the kids in the schools that we will open. And then I'll have done my bit. I always say that when you're 85 and you're on your deathbed, you want to be able to look back over your life and feel you contributed, feel you did something to make the world a better place. And I hope I'll be able to do that.
Oh, you certainly will. You've got no other big P political ambitions.
Absolutely not. People are always saying, you need to go into politics. And I say, yeah, that'll be for another life. Thank you very much. I have absolutely no interest in being a politician. I love kids. I love schools. I love leadership. I love what I do, really. So why would I change it?
Absolutely. Listen, thank you for your time. It's been a couple of weeks organising this because you are so busy doing exactly what you do. Your time is allotted. I feel like I've stolen an extra 15 minutes off you anyway, but I can't thank you enough, Katharine Birbalsingh, for talking to me today. I really, honestly, it's been a privilege.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much for having me.